Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming and being intrepid on the Saturday. I want to first of all thank obviously Smack Mellon for being willing to be spontaneous and just have this talk and being so supportive of Nona's work. And I'm a big fan of her, so I want to thank Kathleen Gilrain, Suzanne, Kim, and Adam, with whom I emailed a lot, so I wanted to give him a shout out as well. So I'm going to start off with something that I wrote recently, like last night-ish. Sort of going back to looking again at Nona's work, I wrote a piece for the Camera Club of New York in 2013, and I reread it. It's always hard to reread old stuff that you've written, and I feel like I missed some things, and but I see that she's moving in new directions, and so my look at the work now also is going to move in new directions. So I wanted to read what I wrote and let Nona sort of respond, and then we'll talk a bit, and then if anyone has really something that they need to interject with, just let us know. I realize that that these images are as much about the human experience as they are about race in particular. They are about accountability, about our collective relationship to history. Increasingly, I'm really seeing something heroic about them. I'm feeling this, that you are swooping in to somehow save the day in a way. And I get the feeling that you, as this mythological creature that you've acknowledged, is sort of part of the fabrication that allows you to be so brave, that you're here to make things right, or at least to try, to address something that has gone ignored. You are a hero who is her sex, who is her race, and yet is universal, who is more than the sum of her subjective parts, who is her naked, unapologetic self. A hero who can materialize the complexity of brutality and solicit compassion, not pity, because it's too late for that.
Right.
You are not a metaphor, and this is not a seduction. All of this you do with an economy of means. The scenes, like the protagonists of the images, are stripped down. They are bare, they are concise. But your images are not merely representations of yourself in a place. To me, it's more of a kind of ventriloquism. You are this voice coming from beyond. You are the voice of reason. You are a Greek chorus of one. You are the voice, and I thought of this yesterday, you are the voice that perpendicularly intersects a reply to Carrie Mae Weems' "From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried." You might say, I am here where it is still happening, and I'm too tired to cry. But you are also more than a voice. You are a hallucination. You are a specular phenomenon. You are a ghost of slavery's past, an apparition of both the victim and the sage. You are a fact and a feeling, a single soul and an entire generation. You are what is often depicted, but rarely seen. You are haunting the places that you choose to depict. These locations that in their utter mundane quality we are almost able to totally disregard, except of course for the sharp silhouette you cut into them. You disrupt the piece of the frame with your frame, your color, cutting across time and identities with an unhesitating stare, or the energy of your determined stride in your Sunday shoes, their whiteness a glare against your skin. You stand there in some of the images and you stare us down. Is it an admonishing glance? Is it a reprimand? You inform us that you embrace being viewed through the lens of your black subjectivity, and we are complicit, as usual, in the denial, in the deception that the suffering of slavery is actually over. But the one condition of this calm exchange that your images offer is that you bring 400 years of baggage for us to unpack site by site. These images, I really feel, also help us to avoid the discussion of numbers, which is, as we know, very disputed. Right. Numbers of how many came across the Middle Passage, how many died. You lead us toward what I consider an overwhelming truth, that every single one of those numbers, of those questionable millions, disputed millions, each one of those is a single nightmare odyssey. Each one is a tale of pain, of fear and suffering, even before arriving on an alien shore to be raped and worked to death. This is our historical inheritance in the United States and the Caribbean, and we have to embrace it fully to understand what the African diaspora really is. And for me, and I think for a lot of people, your work begins to unlock that door. So.
Oh my God. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Oh, you almost brought me to tears here. All of it's true. I mean, you know, in so many ways, I feel like a deep, you know, responsibility, and it, you know, comes from definitely my upbringing, my mother and my father being Southerners. But then it comes from an even deeper place, you know, as someone in this body, you know, walking through the world in this city, and it's an incredible place, you know, to grow up in New York City, to be born and raised, and you're always taught about the history here and how, you know, we're the greatest city in the world and this industrial place that just rose up out of nothing, you know, and yet there's this like invisible layer, you know, which I discovered, you know, because I was always like asking questions, always wondering about this place and that place. My mother would take us out a lot into the city, you know, places where even then a lot of Black people did not go, like on 57th Street, you know, on the Upper East Side, you know, she took us to puppet shows and all that kind of places. And so we were always like looking at the city, but looking at it as if we also belonged, you know, very much this was our city, you know, Radio City Music Hall, all those places. But then there was later this huge question about how we got here. You know, and in school that wasn't taught, you know, it was just glossed over. But then as you get to be an adult and you see the impact of, you begin to ask yourself where you belong in all of it, you know? And there was this point where like we really felt like the city belonged to us, you know? Growing up in the 80s and 90s, you know, you really felt like this was your place, you know? And so then with the discovery of the African burial ground, you really, like a whole nother history was uncovered. And there's always these forces that pulled you back and forth. You know, do you belong here? You didn't build this, you know. Yes, we do belong here. This is ours, you know. And it's definitely the hip hop scene here in New York City and all of that, like we claimed it, you know. So all those histories like are bound and, you know, just coming together. And, but still there was, you know, I've always been very interested in, you know, history, anthropology, archaeology, like, you know, I remember talking and discussing a lot of that with my dad. You know, he's an avid, you know, historian and amateur historian, you know. And so we often had those kind of conversations in my house, you know, social events, Black history, you know, all of that. So it just, I think on so many levels, it transferred, but there was always like, I don't know, when you talk about this heroism, I guess, you know, I have a thing for icons, you know, and symbols are really like big with me. And it wasn't intentional, but in a way, I guess it sort of was. Like, my mom, she's like this warrior type woman to me. You know, I grew up with her, seeing her stand her ground on so many different issues, you know, not only in the home, but out in the street, you know, like, and I guess that transferred over to me. She likes to, I know one time she said to me, you're stronger than I am. And I was like, what are you talking about? Because all my life you were that rock, that hero, that woman that saved the day, that kept it together, that represented. And for her to say that I was stronger than her.
This was recently?
This was a few years ago. But in particular, talking about the work, I felt like there was something missing in photography a little bit.
Well, I think that where you're going with this now is a point that I wanted to make. And you mentioned hip-hop culture. I think that hip-hop culture and music and youth culture for African Americans dominate how much people know about African American culture.
Right.
And so there hasn't been a lot that brings history along with it, like purposefully. And I think that's sort of why your work has found its place, you know, in the short attention span of the media, because you're bringing an interesting image that is engaging and surprising, but it has this whole foundation that once you enter the work, you go deeper and you actually learn, and I find that being able to supplant a little bit of what the cliches are that exist in, you know, film and television and the cliched representations of African Americans, I think that your work is saying, slow down, let me simplify things for you for a second, and focus on these bodies, these people who experience this, and you're actually walking right over it.
Right. Well, you know, also, I mean, it feels, I like to say that it was like 17 years of thought went into this project, because there's things that occur to you every day walking through your life. I mean, like, there's incidents, and there was like the time I was walking from 23rd Street at SVA, where I went to school, all the way to the Brooklyn Bridge. I used to walk all the way to homes, you know, at different times in my life. And this one particular night, I just walked right into this African burial ground. They were excavating the burial ground, and I was like, you know, what's going on? And they were like 25 feet down into the ground. And they were like, we found bones, you know? And then so that resided with me, right? And then it was always about also my blackness, right? That was another thing, you know, my dark skin and where I fit in and didn't throughout school, throughout middle school to high school. And then there was so many like different things that occurred over the years, you know, that just layered upon layered, and me thinking about, you know, the type of woman or girl that I was, and why there was no representation of who I was or looked like really in the media, you know. So that was another thing, and there was just like constant reoccurring, you know, events and things that made me question my place. And then within photography, then I began to, you know, see the black body in photography with Carrie May's work and Lorna Simpson's work, and wanting to find my own voice and language. And so it just took like that many years, and then all of a sudden one day it just came together. Like one day I just had the tools to put it together in the MFA program at
Well, I want to
ICP.
talk about your process of getting sort of to this project. I know that you started exploring your body as a subject on your rooftop.
Right.
I think prior, if I'm correct, prior to starting the White Shoes.
Right.
And then you sort of made a leap. Your interest in history and archaeology and anthropology, you made a leap, and which were the first locations? Was it, you had been at the beach, and you put sort of like two and two together and said,
Right.
oh,
Yeah.
this is the place, I'm going to start here.
Yeah. So I started first year in the MFA program, and I was, again, my little girl was 3 years old, or just turned 3 when I joined. And almost like right off the bat, like October, November of the program, I started photographing myself nude. One thing that triggered it, I think, there was a number of things. One, my classmates. There was a picture that Kiana Mestridge showed in the first year. You know, we were all showing our work, and so she put this picture up of her pushing, she was in her home naked, but she was pushing a stroller, but you only saw her from the neck down, and it was a side profile. And so that sort of resonated with me. And I don't know what else, there was something else, but that was one of the images that resonated with me. And then I started.
And you did a
from there.
video. Was the video prior to starting the series? Remember that video that you did where you run to the shore
No.
naked?
That was in February. That was later, much later. That was much later, yeah. But, and then I had a horrible kitchen accident. I was cooking, and I was on the phone with a restaurant yelling at them, and I flipped the salmon, and all the grease just popped up on my chest. And then I was in the program. I was struggling. I had no money. I was waiting for my student loan. There was all this stuff going on. And
that's why you had the bandage. Oh.
And then from there, no money, in a rigorous MFA program, horrific burn, I just felt like I was really stressed and like I was fighting for my life. I don't know. I felt like I was in a battle. I just, it was a culmination of things, that I was still carrying, my failed relationship, and
so for
and
those
how
of
to
you
deal
who
with that.
haven't seen this image, which exists online probably, you're on your rooftop.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, it doesn't. Okay,
exist.
you have boxing gloves on. She has a bandage across her chest.
No, I felt like I envisioned myself as a boxer, as a woman fighting for her life, right? I have my little girl in one arm, or she's holding onto my leg. I have this bandages around my chest, and I have my arms bandaged. And I'm on my roof, and there's a church behind me, but the steeple is like right over my head, like as if like crowning. Oh. And I remember in Slide Fest, there were some Italians that came for one of our students, and when they saw that image, they said, oh, and I knew that they saw the Madonna, and they saw that steeple, the church steeple, and they were like, and I didn't realize it at that point until they did that, what it was. I instantly knew, having gone to Italy and stuff, I instantly knew why they reacted that way. But yeah, so that was the beginning of exploring my body in that kind of way. And along the way I was shooting other things. I was shooting other people's kids at the carousel over there. I was shooting people at Coney Island. But then we moved like towards the end of the year. And there was 2 images that stayed consistent on my wall in my studio, and that was Sarah Bartman, Venus Hottentot, from the 19th century. She was put on display in Paris and London as a freak. Her body was dissected. Her, private parts were actually pickled. Her skeleton was actually put on display in Paris Museum. So her picture remained on my wall, and the other one was Delia. And every time we would change studios or whatever, it just remained consistent. And I knew they meant something to me, but I really didn't know what. And then I read this book, Delia's Tears, which is about photography in the 19th century, culminated with slavery, culminated with this woman who was photographed and a whole bunch of African slaves who the first daguerreotypes of them enslaved was taken. And this whole science formed around the inferiority of African people. And it was like worldwide, this whole theory, based on a look. And so her picture and Venus Hottentot stayed on my wall. And, you know, I continued to do my work and shoot and go to school. But those images like burned in me. They like just really burned in me. And the more I learned about the story, which I had known before about Venus Hottentot, because that happened, I discovered that story in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, in the bookstore, back when I was, I don't know, undergrad. And I had never heard anything like that before. So I carried that with me. That's another incident that I carried with me. And then—
What, finding the book?
Yeah, and Venus Hottentot. And then Delia, I saw the first time in Carrie Mae Weems. I usually say people's names, I don't say the whole name. I say it as if I know them. Carrie Mae, like she's my best friend. I did meet her this summer, actually, in Italy. So she was the first time, it was the first time I saw Delia in her work and that whole series. And so those two images stayed on my wall in my studio. And then for some reason I figured out I wanted to answer them. I wanted to answer that image that Louis Agassiz had made. And so I put on a crown. I took one of my little girl's crowns, and I got these white gloves. And at some point I had the idea to the white shoes at that time. And I went to Payless and I found the white shoes. And when I first saw the white shoes, they struck me as being like these proper lady shoes that like Queen Elizabeth would wear to Sunday church, you know. So that they were the type of Western beauty ideal type feminist shoe, you know, that I felt answered, that was sort of in opposition a little bit with the idea of the Black female body, you know, this proper Western, you know. So that was how. So anyway, I took this portrait in my home of me with the crown, the white gloves, the shoes, and it was really like this. You know, Delia is sitting with her dress stripped down to her waist.
Delia looks sad. I looked at that image last night.
Oh my God!
And
the eyes.
Yeah,
you can't get
they are
over
soulful
the eyes
and just abject.
But yet she has this. Have you guys seen that picture? No. Her features are incredible. I mean, she's
beautiful.
Cheekbones, like, I mean, she's just immaculate, beautiful face, and you just wonder what happened to this woman on this plantation in South Carolina. And but the eyes, and that's why they were hidden. People believe these photographs, once taken, were hidden in the Harvard Peabody Museum because they just like cut in half any idea of what they wanted to form them as being subhuman, not human, but the eyes are human. They reach the soul. They show the soul. And so
there's that whole interesting thing that happened with Carrie Mae Weems and those images. She used them in that artwork, and then Harvard sued her. Right,
because she used them illegally.
And she went to court. She willingly went to court with them and won the case.
Yeah, no. Actually, I saw her last night or a couple of nights ago actually tell the story. They were going to sue her, And so at first she was really startled that they were going to sue her. And then she told them, you know what, you should sue me. And let's put this out in the public realm. Let's have a discussion.
Yeah.
And they backed off. And they then said, okay, well, every time you make a sale, you have to pay us. So she was like, you know, it was, you gotta look it up. But anyway, she, Art 21, she talks about it. So yeah, those two images, and I wanted to counteract that, and that's when I did my own self-portrait, sitting on, but it was going to be more like, I am a queen, I am a human being, I am worthy, I am beautiful.
Because you were in control of your props and your
Right,
pose,
right.
and your, you know,
And yeah, and
everything.
I was sitting on it. You could see this image. I'm sitting on a stool, and it's royal blue fabric around on the stool, and so.
Is that an image that is at Camera Club?
Yes.
Okay.
It's at the Camera Club, limited edition.
It's available. You can see it also at the Camera Club of New
Yeah.
York, Baxter Street. But I wanted to go back to the white shoes because I went to graduate school with Nona. We overlapped. She was 1 year behind me, and I remember immediately liking the idea of the white shoes. It appealed to me because as a Cuban kid transplanted from Cuba to Atlanta, Georgia in the 70s, I knew that little white pumps were Sunday shoes. Like I knew that somehow, and I read it as such, and I found it interesting that of all the things that, you know, remained on you in these images, it was the white shoes that didn't come off. Mm-hmm. But there was some push and pull, you know, in the discussions in your critiques about the shoes. Do you want to talk about that? You know,
From what I can remember, it was the last image of the year that I showed that, and it didn't cause too much of a ripple from what I can remember. I remember some of my classmates really thinking it was a breakthrough. That image was a breakthrough, and they were so excited. I remember Nandita, for one, saying, oh, that image was really awesome. You came out at the end of the year with that badass image. And then I still didn't have it. I went to the beach that summer for the first time with my daughter, and I never wore a bathing suit, never spent, you know, because I had body issues pretty much all my life, but I always loved my body in a way. It was the messages that I got from society that made me feel, you know, perhaps ashamed. So I went to the beach wanting to give her a different kind of childhood from what I had. Like my mom, we went to Coney Island a lot, but not the beach. But anyway, we went to the beach, I bought the bathing suit, and I saw all these different New York City bodies. And the great thing about New York City is nobody gives a fuck, you know? Nobody cares. There was like people like this, and there was this, and there was Russian ladies like this, and I mean, it was like, I was like, oh, I am in my element now. I'm in my element. And so I just hung out like I was a fucking goddess on the beach. And and so the end of the summer came, we literally like up until September was still on the beach. And that's when I had to keep thinking about the thesis. What am I gonna do for the thesis? And that's when like I had it that it was about the body, and the environment. But these scenes, these places always stayed in my head. I always knew about them. And then I just put them together, me and the body. But there was still, the nudity wasn't there yet. Like, even though I did that first image, the nudity in these public places weren't there. And I remember having a conversation with Brian Pommier and Joaquin, his partner. And I sort of had it, like, I wanted to make a statement, really strong statement. But I was thinking of having like this cape. This is my little cape. Just being in these places with the little cape. And so we were talking, and I remember Brian saying, Nona, if you want to do it, just do it. You know, if you want to be naked, just do it. And I was like, I knew when he said it that was right. And Joaquin was more like, wait a minute, you're gonna be out there naked, wait a minute. But it was already there, like, nope, this is it. This is the way to go. If you're gonna do, one of the things our executive director in the MFA program always said, if you have something to say it. If you wanna make a point, say it, and say it boldly, say it matter-of-factly.
Yeah, you can always pull back.
Right.
If you're saying it too loudly.
Right.
But you need to say it.
His philosophy, Nayland Blake, he was more like, don't dance around it. Like, don't be, veiled, all this stuff, smoke and mirrors. Like, go say what you want to say. And for me, I've always been a realist. And so I always felt that, you have to keep it real and just be honest. Honesty was always another thing that I was raised up, honest and loyalty, And so I felt like if you were gonna really make a statement, you had to risk something. If it was something that was really important to you, passionately, you had to step up. And that was another part of hip hop, like keeping it real, and, be bold. And I spent another thing, I spent the whole year going to school. Every morning I would be listening to either Jay-Z or Kanye West. The Throne, that album, that key album was what played in my head almost every morning. And they like, I like the bravado of the male rapper and the female rapper. Don't get me wrong. Queen Latifah, that's my girl. But it was that bravado and that fearlessness, that was there in hip hop from the beginning, but also that they just, and Jay is old school, he's from that old school hip hop. So they brought this bravado, and it just infused in me, like this sort of fearlessness. The power was always within me, I believe, but the inspiration, you is from many sources, and that was one of them.
I find it interesting that you're sort of telling us like how the leap into the first, nude portraiture that you did. But then there was also a leap when you took that, when you left the safety of Brooklyn and you went across the East River and started approaching Manhattan as a possible venue.
Yeah.
And that was upping the stakes again.
Right, because I had become so comfortable at the beach. That was my first place. That was my place where, and at the beach, nobody cared, in a way. I mean, sometimes they, see me and, people just even tourists, they just used to, it's New York, people are filming, people are photographing on the street all the time, and so they wouldn't really bother me. But then I felt like, okay, you gotta move it along. You gotta go to these places that are really speaking to the heart of the matter, that really connect tangibly to those places of slavery where the ancestors are literally under your feet. And so the first place was Supreme Court. And I remember taking two of my classmates, my neighbor, and my sister. And because Supreme Court has all these cameras going, the first time we failed.
That was when Brigitte and Z tried to talk to the policeman.
The first time it was just me and my sister. We got there, and we were just standing on the steps, and the guy could see us. He so if we did anything, boom, it was like over. So then I just devised to come back with a trio of people, and two would be distracting him while my neighbor is like where you are in line with me, but out of the frame. And then my sister's there with the camera. And so I usually set up the frame. She's my stand-in. And then she comes out I step in, and then, you know, I tell her when to hit the shutter. So, so my neighbor's over here, and I'm here, and then boom, I take off the coat, throw it to her, and she hits the shutter, and then we leave. But oh my God, my stomach is always flipping back and forth 5,000 times. And so then I wanted to go again. I just didn't feel like I had it. And we went again, and I think we went 4 times. Because I just didn't feel like I have it, but it's a terrifying high security place. And by the time I finished, the next time I went through that area, I saw a cop car like right up on the steps. Like, in case that woman with the white shoes come back, we got you. You know, like, and I knew they were there waiting for me, because the last time I went, the very last time I went, there was nobody to distract him. And so, boom, I did it again, and I could hear him calling for the police. Like, that's another thing. When you're that stripped down, like, the only thing you have is your ears, you know, because you're trying to stay focused for the camera, you're communicating with the camera, but yet your other senses have to pick up around you. And so I could hear him real clearly, like, you know, and I was like, oh, and then we put the coat back on, and like, I literally hailed a cab in front of Supreme Court and jumped in, and we drove off. Like, sometimes it's like adrenaline rush. Like, I do feel sometimes like a kind of superhero a little bit. I don't.
See, you have
that particular day, I did. I felt like a superhero, but
you know, like, talking again about this heroic, you know, value that I've attributed to your work. You've gotten a lot of negative comments out there, and let's not give them any more credibility.
Yeah.
But you've also received a lot of positive feedback, and you've inspired a lot of people. And I think that as photographers and as artists, you're kind of like in this great position that is enviable, because to know that you're influencing people's you know, point of view to the extent that they are inspired and they are embracing themselves and loving themselves more, or becoming more open-minded, not just learning about history, but about themselves as an individual who has a history of survivors, of all the millions of people who died in the Middle Passage, who then, you know, came here and were slaves. You are the legacy of survivors, and you're now like in a positive loop of feedback. And how does that feel? And what are some of the things that that people are telling you?
I had no idea. Like, I literally had no idea that it would impact people like that. Like, the messages I got from people really all over the world, that the images came out, and I really didn't intend for them to come out like that. You know, I did the article for Huffington Post. They asked me in June of last year, and when they asked for so many images, you know, but it was the first time anybody had really, like, in the public sphere, asked to do a piece on me. Yeah, you had wrote the first, and there was a couple of other small little things, but this was like the first big publication. And so they asked for like 12 images. And so, you know, I'm an emerging artist, and I was like, you know, the work was still precious to me and still like my baby. And I didn't want to like put it out there for multiple reasons. But nonetheless, I did, you know. And when it hit, at first it was, you know, it was a nice amount of feedback, but it wasn't until 4th of July when Black Girl with Long Hair just snatched the images from their website and the article and put it on her blog. And she had a sizable amount of people, like huge. I had never heard of her, but huge. Once I went and looked, and she tagged me in it and put it on Facebook. And I was like, oh, you know, you could have asked me, you know, but it was too late. It was absolutely too late, and it just went viral. And the good response was more overwhelming than the negative. And what was really touching was women, black and white, and Asian, there was some Asian women there too, speaking to me about being brave and courage, and how they also identified with my body type because that's how they looked. Some of them was like, I thought it was me at first, you know, and that was incredible because I felt it was a big risk. Like some of the images I would still cringe at when I saw myself, but I felt so passionately also about showing my body. I also was very passionate about it because, you know, having had my daughter, I embraced that womanhood. I celebrated it. She loved my body. My baby loved I breastfed her. And so my body to her is like a beautiful thing. Even now, she always like touches and jiggles, like, you know, any part of me, you know. And so that was an important part. But yeah, the people, some of them poured their heart out, and some of them, like, they embraced me so much, like as if they knew me. And there was this like deep kindred relationship between that they had to the images. And that was really touching. And they also championed talking about slavery. There's overwhelming amount of pain and trauma still connected for Black Americans and white Americans.
And New Yorkers were sort of still in denial. I mean, it was last year that de Blasio put the plaque downtown. I mean, 2015, a plaque that says, you know, this was a burial site, and people died.
A slave market.
Yeah,
that came from a year of people fighting, the city council fighting to, along with Occupy Wall Street, to mark that spot on Wall Street. So it wasn't, he didn't just come into office and, he wanted to do good. It took over a year of them identifying the site and constantly. And New York City, that's the part that really rips out my heart, that the resistance to the history, the resistance to admitting what took place here.
There was a strong Confederate group in New York that resisted the abolitionist movement. And I was just reading today, you know, that we know of, there's a particular thing that happened where 11 men were lynched and stripped and hung from lampposts in New York City and burned. And we just don't know these things.
There's some horrific things that went on in New York City's history during slavery. Just briefly, one where the World Trade Center site is, that was a site of a massacre of Native American women and children. Okay, that was one of them. But they have marked places where they hung people, and they didn't just used to hang people. They would put you in an iron cage and just hold you up, hang you up in the cage just to rot and die. Like, that was one of the British were like really experts at that kind of torture and killing and making these devices. So we really fought for slavery. We didn't want it to end. We were married to the South. We bought their cotton, we manufactured it, we shipped it to, you know, places far and wide for sale. So it was no surprise then that after slavery was over, they would like make all attempts to erase that history. You know, put 25 feet of landfill over the burial ground and every other place that Black people were buried, just to pave over it. And, you know, it's in my belief that we are living over a lot of bones, you know.
Let's open it up. I mean, you guys have been listening for a little while and see, it's nice to see familiar faces. Does anybody have any comments or questions, or just want to throw anything out for conversation?
Christine.
Hi. When you talk about Coney Island and the pleasure of being there and you know the freedom, I was thinking about the Lizette Modell photograph of the full-figured woman in this water, and there's so much pleasure in that picture as well. But I wanted to ask you about this photograph and the connection to that space.
Yeah, this for me, this image is a breakthrough for me. For one, like if I ever took an image and it feels like I didn't take it or so, and this feels like that. Like we went there. It's the Lefferts house. The Lefferts were one of the largest slave-owning families in New York City. 4 generations lived in this house. African slaves built this house, and so this is another thing that's been in my life for years. Growing up and living in Brooklyn all my life, I've passed this house a million zillion times, bus, walking, everything. But I didn't know the history of this house until recently. And once I did, and knew about the slaves that this family had, some of them, I had to make, and once I get something like that in my head, it's like, yes, I have to go there. I have to go there. And so I went there the first time, and it didn't really work out. And the night before I went back to shoot this, I came up with the idea of the baby shoes, my daughter's shoes. And I thought about, always in my head, I'm thinking about the women in slavery. There's stories we don't know, some we do, it's there. But there's a record of what went on in multiple places, and it's just, again, it's just a horror show, you know. And I think about them, and I think about how, in relation to them and my family, it's 4 generations of women who've had the ability to care for their own children and not have their children sold away from them. So me, my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother. So 4 generations of having to mother and, you know, take care of children without the threat of them being sold. And I often think about them. And so those were like, I create little stories in my head around these women and this mother, you know, holding on to something, anything, a piece of cloth of their child that has been sold. And so I often also think about my own daughter, you know, what being taken away from me and what that may be like, and God forbid. And so, you know, that's when I put myself in that situation and that kind of context, you know, in the image.
This image, for me, you know, I'm glad you brought it up because I wanted to talk about it. You mentioned at the opening that it was a breakthrough image, and I feel the difference. Something about it is different. Suddenly, there's something theatrical about it, without it being, you know,
Over
pejorative. It's in a good way, where I think that, and you call it not seeing yourself as you.
Yeah.
But I think that it's just, there's so many subtleties in it. The shoes around your belly, I don't know why, it just like, it broke my heart.
Yeah.
Because I knew right away that it was about loss and absence,
right.
and a stilted childhood. Those shoes are not filled by children. They're actually empty, and there's, you know, a hopefulness about it. So.
Yeah.
I mean, this one to me speaks the most about your concept without knowing it and seeing it visually.
Right.
Because when I see it, I actually think of Walker Evans, and that immediately connects me to the South. And the reason why is the light that's in the background there,
Right.
and also the shoes.
Right.
There's quite a number of photographs of shoes in Lisa's work, and the style of the shoe also connects right back to that time period of photography. And all of that, I just immediately, I didn't know where it was, and I just thought the South.
Right.
She's connected to the land, And that's what I saw visually, with I don't have to read anything, and that's where that one just kind of like popped out.
Yeah.
Photography is speaking to me.
That's why it connected to me too when I saw it. And as soon as I shot it, I went to check the film, and bam, it jumped out, and I knew I had it, because the day before, the light was even stronger. It was almost like on a film set. But when I went back the next day, it was more muted and it was fading. But it was enough to catch it in the door, and that's what stood out. And then coming off of my face and my breast, it was enough illumination to capture that mood. But also the house, you know, it feels very Southern, even though it's New York.
No, the house feels alive. It feels lived in. Let's. Somebody had their arm
Yeah.
up back
Oh,
here.
wait, over here, over here.
Okay.
He was waiting.
So I don't quite know how to say this, but I think, at least for me, much of the power of your photographs come from the way they play with time. I think of, I mean, admittedly this is limited, I think of photography as a very sort of synchronic art form. It's about this particular moment as captured under this particular lighting conditions in this unrepeatable moment.
Right.
But what your photography is doing is throwing us into a kind of time warp,
Right.
where we're calling into mind other times within the very same space. You know, so there's a kind of transporting you're doing with an instantaneous art form, and I don't know quite. I mean, I think it's brilliant. I just don't know how to process the effects it's generating in me. It's dislocating in a very fertile way.
Right. Well, that's part of the project, is taking you back, possibly in time, putting you in that sort of space, that same exact space where there's tangible links to slavery, but yet there's these modern buildings around us. But if you just, it also, you need for you to use your imagination for it to really work. And I always think about time, and I always think about time traveling. And if I could just go back, how can you go back? And a lot of the imagery in the project, you know, I'm not very eloquent about what it is, how to speak about what it is I'm doing, but I know what I'm doing, and I know what should be there, and what I'm operating a lot from my heart and instincts. And I still read a lot, and so I read a lot of history, and so that takes me and tells me what I should be doing and feeling, you know. So yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you how important you think it is to see the images in a group, to see them all together, like in reference to the Huffington Post article and all that as well. And then also related to time, I just really appreciate your sequencing here. It feels like a narrative. It feels like I am moving through time, like decades.
Yeah.
And everything with that as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you do that on purpose or.
Yeah. Well, you know, Suzanne Kim, deputy director, we laid it out, and of course we went with the first images, but then there was ways to put in what went well with each other, like the palette, you know, and so, you know, we worked on the sequencing like that. But what was the other question?
Just if it's how important it is to have them seen as a
Oh
group.
yeah.
Oh, can I answer that actually? Because that issue came up. I curated a show for the 10-year anniversary of the ICP MFA, and I definitely wanted Nona to be in it because I think her conversation is unique, and it added, you know, a kind of weight that I wanted for that show. But some people, I included several bodies of work, and Nona asked me, and I'm sorry to reveal this, she's like, why are you only choosing one of my pieces? And I really felt that one was really just enough because it's an aria. You know, in a cacophony of competing themes and colors and materials and methods, her image was a solitary, piercing piece that just brought you in, and I didn't feel that it broke any kind of sequence. I think that it was its own entity. I did it on a wall where I secretly felt there was a lot of femininity to me, and not just women artists, but the work on that particular wall. And I think it was successful in it being just this one image, sort of cutting through like a hot knife.
Yeah,
So-
and then you were right, because Studio Museum picked it up, and that one image, she wanted to select more than one, but in the end, she decided on that one. And when you go in that wall gallery where it is the Wall Street image, it's just there, and it sort of, it stands out,
Thank you for what you created. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
And, I come from a family that's very clear on their history. We still hold to all the truths that happened in our family with regard to slavery. So it's wonderful to see it documented here in New York. Two other quick thoughts. On that picture, I was going to ask about that photo also, so I'm glad somebody brought it up. When I saw it, it's interesting to get a conversation about it, because what struck me immediately was that you were making a statement about all the white babies that black mothers had to, that black families had to
That's
feed.
true.
And I thought that's what those booties represented. And
That
then,
could
of course,
too.
the breasts showing made me think of that.
Mhm.
And then it was even more painful to realize what you were.
Yeah.
The children that were sold away.
But I love when people come with their own narrative. Like, for instance, like some of the early images in school, they didn't see some of these images. I only had about 6, so they didn't see them until the thesis show. Nobody saw the work until the thesis show. And they came up with, like some of the European girls in my class, they had totally different, even some of them thought it was political and everything, but they came to it with like ideas about sculpture and the way painters and sculptors work with the body. There's some artists who use like, fat bodies in the work, and in these like settings like this. And so that was some of their, way of connecting with the work. And I embraced it. I was like, great, I just love hearing other people's interpretation and ideas. And I think that's when it gives the work even a new dimension and life, outside of what I originally had,
Thank you. And the other point I wanted to mention is that I'm sitting here reminiscing about Hamilton. I don't know if you've seen the play.
No, I haven't, but I heard.
You must see it.
Uh-huh.
But only because it was such a unique form for telling a very powerful story. I wish more of the New York truths were in that story, but of course you can only say so much in 3 hours.
Right.
But it makes me think that your work would be amazing on stage. Have you thought about that? Having gigantic images of your pictures, and then maybe you, if you're theatrical, or someone, an actor you could bring in?
I'm not that theatrical, but
Somebody approached you.
somebody did approach me, and this is in Europe, in Belgium, a group, someone from the city council in Belgium somewhere had asked me. They loved the series, and they wanted to create a ballet around it with African dancers. And I was like, yes! And, she was really excited, but I didn't hear back. I said, yes. They said, well, it's just metaphorically, but, they were really excited. So yeah, that's, it actually can translate to that as well, yeah.
Please do it.
They gotta call me back.
No, please do this on the New York stage.
Oh, okay.
Let's go to this gentleman.
Hi.
Well, I remember probably the beginning of the work, like that picture, like ICP studio opening years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I remember I was very interested in that picture. I didn't know about your work and everything. What I'm interested in this edit, is that picture, which I think like adds more layer to like the performative aspect of your work. I would like you to comment a little bit about that.
Yeah.
The one with the cutouts.
Yes, the cutouts originally was from a piece that was at installation piece. It was my first time trying installation at the ICP group show. And I have to give credit, Joaquim Trujillo, he came up with the idea of, it was so tumultuous, like it was really, in many aspects, my journey through the MFA program was really hard in many various ways. I won't go into detail, but, and at the end, he was like, you know, you should make a statement. And he pulled out, he says, I pulled out what was already present in your work, but he was like, you should do some cardboard cutouts, like at the circus, and you know, with the face cut out, and then you put your face through, and you're somebody else's body, you know, like that. And he was like, you should just put it in the hallway, like. But he had something about a mirror, and then the person would be looking at me, but they'd be looking at themselves. It was like this whole dynamic thing. And in the end, I was like, no, I don't need all that, just the cutouts. And so I came up with the cutouts, but then I cut my face out of them as representative of the anonymous women that we don't know lost to time, their stories, the anonymous Black enslaved women. And I had this idea, again, of front, back, side profile, which is the way Louis Agassiz photographed the African slaves in that series. And that also is a way they photographed the criminally insane and
criminals.
Criminals. That was so it came out of slavery. That mugshot, those classic side front profile, came out of slavery. And so then I took that, and they were on this striped wall, but I moved, you know, afterward I had these images, and I wanted to go to the cemetery. And the first time I went to the cemetery, I went with Davis. Davis Thompson Moss is my friend. He comes with me on shoots sometimes. And we went to the cemetery, and we shot a long time, but we was almost mobbed in the cemetery, like from the people in the neighborhood. Found it very offensive, of course, that I was there naked. And then I still felt it was something missing, and I like to go back a couple of times. So I went back, and I brought the cutouts to stand in representative of the 3 slaves that are buried in that cemetery, where we don't know, but it's a white Dutch cemetery, and it goes back to pre-revolutionary times. So I put those as stand-ins for myself.
Thank you. I mean, it's great, and it's also, like, I didn't know the story behind it, but it's also very interesting, as, you know, a layer, like having more Nonas, but more like characters.
Yeah.
You know, like the characters that you're like impersonating in your pictures.
Yeah.
I love like the fact that there's like one person and one character.
I call them the 3 Nonas.
Which is like very, very, you know, present and very symbolic, but also like having like in that pictures.
I also like that leap from installation object to part of the photograph. I think it was very interesting. I was very intrigued when I first saw it. I was confused. I love being confused by a photograph, and I love feeling slightly tricked, and it pulls you in even more. So
A lot of people think it's Photoshop, but they're actually cardboard cutouts.
Well, the sculptural element is
Yes.
important because it can dialogue with the real character in the other pictures. I think it creates a very interesting, you know, parallel.
Yeah, thank
okay,
you.
let's go.
Well, I was thinking as you were talking about, you know, how history is important to you and your relationship to it. And I was thinking about it in relation to these 2 pictures here. So as you say, you know, like the problem when we think about the Black diaspora history and Black diaspora memory and subjectivity is not only this intentional obliteration and erasure and suppression or twisting of history. It is also this moment of kidnapping people, right? And you know, as some scholars say, like the beginning of like the diasporic subjectivity is on the ship, right? But then also the memory and accessing that memory becomes an incredible problem because conventional tools of history won't do. You know, one cannot historicize and access this collective generational memory through conventional, pretty much Western patriarchal means of remembering. So there is this like clause, this interruption. How do you access? How do you think? How do you get in touch with your cultural memory with this like interruption, this like loss of language, loss of national identity, loss of ethnic identity. This the records of Middle Passage are scarce, and even more so when it comes to women, right? So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to this, memory which is impossible. How does one even think and speak about such violence, and yet one has to?
Right. Well, I am one that firmly believes that the trauma is written across Black people's bodies. It's how you even read us when you come in the room. It's how we read each other. It's how white people read Black people. I feel that it's plain as day written across the legacy of our history, as well as with Jewish people. I also firmly believe that trauma is handed down through our DNA. I believe there's an instinctive record of it passed down, and scientists are now exploring just that, particularly with victims of the Holocaust and their children and their grandchildren, and science is trying to uncover that. And there is also a record, sort of like a folklore history that says, like, for instance, when I was pregnant, my mother, I had gone through a breakup and I was pregnant. And so my mother was always telling me to be happy. Don't pass on the trauma that I was experiencing to my baby in utero. And so there's this belief that you pass on, trauma and that kind of thing to your children. So I firmly believe that, and you just have to tap into it. I think we all carry this kind of sorrow from whatever kind of trauma we experienced, even if it's not of our own. For instance, like my aunt died, she jumped out of the window with her daughter in a fire. And I heard about that from a little girl. And so that's part of my makeup now, even though it didn't directly happen to me. Stories of the Holocaust, just reading about what those people went through you are like, just take it in. And so you only have to just tap into that as a human being, that's how you do it,
Anyone else have something to add?
Hi.
Hi.
We came to this exhibit on Thursday during Art Walk, and we didn't even know that there was anything back here. And we came in and we were just completely stunned by how the emotional depth of this is just amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was hoping you could maybe talk more about the photograph behind you. Talk about environment and slavery narratives. The woods always seem a place to try to escape or run away or to hide or have some level of safety even though it's so dangerous.
Right.
So something you can tell us more about.
Well, first of all, these two were taken in the botanical garden under the Caucasian wingnut tree. This place was all part of Dutch farmland, and actually across the street is Prospect Park, and the Revolutionary War was fought through there, and I assume all of this area. And I'm still doing research on it, but this is like a mini narrative. I'm a storyteller, as you may or may not know, but I'm a storyteller. So I like to work out many stories. And so, you know, I thought about this one. I was telling someone about the places we traverse and walk through every day that have, you know, trauma events that have long been forgotten, we don't know about. And I thought also about the history of violence upon Black women, period. From then until now, there's like, you know, this war against women. And I thought, you know, in this one, she dies, you know, she's there. And then she's regenerated. She metamorphosized into this woman that comes back, you know, who is symbolic of original woman, you know. It says in science, you know, scientists have said that we carry, most of us carry the DNA of 2 women all the way back in time. You know, we all carry part of her, and from Africa. And so, which is why I'm wearing the African mask. And so she's Eve, she's Mother Nature, she's, you know, and so this was in early spring, and then this was in summer. And I was just really amazed at how the landscape just, I mean, changes. Like I went there and then I didn't go back until, and I was just amazed. It was a totally different like tree, you know. But yeah, you think about escape and hiding, and the forest being our friend and foe, you know, being places where they lynch people. You know, this tree is very haunting to me. It has like all these long, gnarly, and it changes colors in different weathers, of course. Sometimes it's real dark and black and creepy, and then it comes up, and it's like this, you know. So that's where that came from. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up over because I was kind of wondering, like that tree looks really similar in both those photographs.
Yeah.
And the mask seems almost like the true self, I guess. And then just going from this one to that one, just so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Let's take a question in the back, as I see you've had your hand up a couple of times.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of talk about your experience in academia as a woman of color, and in a fine arts program, especially. I know you're looking back, and I know how I feel in an MA program in philosophy. So I just want to know how you sort of had a metamorphosis. I'm sure in the MFA program, and it's indicative in your paintings. I mean, in your photographs, and I wanted to just hear you talk about that a little bit.
You know, when I'm wondering, I'm trying to figure out.
Let me start this one off. The reason that she and I bonded in school was because I gave her a heads up about a couple of people who were obviously, whether they acknowledged it outright or not, had issues with Nona because of her Blackness. And, you know, I kind of let her know I have your back on this. And that negativity did in fact materialize, and I feel hopefully she was partly prepared, but it still hurt her a lot. And you know, it wasn't easy for her. And you know, her journey has been real special to me. I just feel like her voice is unique, but she was not immune, despite being so strong and having such a clear idea of who she is. You were still vulnerable through it. And so,
well, you know, I'll say my journey through the program at ICP and MFA was an incredible one. They really gave me the tools to become a better artist. And it was a struggle when you're dealing with racism, plain and simple. But I used that. I used it to get me through and to form this body of work. You know, I was told that I didn't belong there. I was told that I devalued their degree by being in the MFA program. And so from that point on, I was determined to prove them wrong. And I always knew I was capable and a good photographer. I just needed the tools to evolve from where I had been. But MFA programs, whether it's writing, photography, are really hard for people of color because most of the time you're in an environment where you're one of the only, or one of two, or one of three, right? And a lot of times the things that you're talking about, your experiences, your work is unique to them. They've never had to be in that kind of conversation with you. So sometimes the reaction is to, this is so foreign, I don't understand it. What are you talking about? You know, what do you mean? You know, what does that mean? You know, particularly I've heard, you know, writers having a really hard, black writers and people, Latino people, really having a hard time. And so you just have to like lock it down and just push it away from you, you know? And you just have to really believe, have a strong sense of self, and you have to have a really good support system. And so my support system was, you know, Jorge. I could talk to Jorge. I could talk at home to my family. And don't be afraid to cry and just shed some tears, because I cried for the whole 2 years, along with not getting any sleep. So you just have to really be strong in your convictions, but open. And don't be afraid to talk to people within the program. If you're having problems within the program, you know, don't be afraid that people are going to call you a troublemaker or think it's all about you're the one causing it. You know, don't be afraid to bring it to the forefront. I waited late to do that, and I regret that. But it was a journey, but I like to think that part of it made me like really stronger, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're sort of right on schedule. Thank you so much for coming. You're welcome to stay and take a closer look at the work and ask any questions directly to Nona or myself or the gallerist. Thank you very much.
Thank you.